Now, I'm gonna tell you a story that happened a long time ago, back when the frontier was still testing folks to see what they were made of. It's about a woman named Martha Green, and the day that changed everything for her. Folks back then had a different way of measuring a person's worth, especially a woman's worth, and it wasn't always fair. Sometimes it was downright cruel. But every now and then, a story comes along that reminds us what real strength looks like. It's not always loud, and it's not always pretty. Sometimes it's just a woman standing alone, counting nails in a wooden platform, refusing to break while the whole town watches. This happened in a dusty little place called Silver Creek, out where the land was hard and so were the people. Some stories you remember because they're sweet. This one you remember because it's true. The hooks on Martha's dress wouldn't fasten right. Her mother's fingers kept slipping on the small brass catches that ran up the back of the brown calico. Neither woman had spoken a word since they'd risen before dawn. The biscuits Martha had made for breakfast sat cold on the pine table, butter going hard in the morning chill. Through the kitchen window, the sky was just starting to lighten that pale gray that comes before the sun thinks about showing itself. Martha stood still as a fence post, arms loose at her sides. She'd learned not to help when her mother's hands shook like this. Helping only made it worse, made the shame between them something they'd have to name out loud. The last hook caught. Her mother's hands dropped away like she'd been burned. "There," her mother said. Just that one word. Her voice sounded like it was coming from the bottom of a dry well. Martha turned around slow. Her mother was staring at the floor, at those pine planks they'd scrubbed yesterday with lye soap, until Martha's knuckles bled raw. The sharp smell still hung in the air, clean and harsh and punishing. "Mama, your father's got the wagon ready." Martha's throat closed up tight. She nodded, though her mother wasn't looking at her to see it. In the bedroom, Martha picked up her carpet bag, everything she owned in the world, fit inside. 2 spare dresses, her grandmother's Bible with the cracked leather cover, a hairbrush missing half its bristles. The bag's brass clasps felt cold under her fingers. She stood there a moment, looking at the room she'd slept in for 30 years. The quilt her mother had pieced from old clothes. The water stain on the ceiling that looked like a dog's head. If you squinted just right, she would not cry. Would not give them that. Outside, her father sat in the wagon with the reins already in his hands. Didn't look at her when she climbed up beside him. Just clucked to the horse and the wagon lurched forward, wheels creaking in the quiet. They rode without talking. Martha watched the sun come up over the eastern hills, turning everything the color of new copper. Beautiful morning for the end of the world. Funny how that works sometimes. The sky doesn't care what's happening down here with us folks. "Best get this settled," her father said to the road ahead. Not to her. Never to her anymore. Martha didn't answer. There wasn't anything to say that wouldn't make things worse. Main Street in Silver Creek looked like every other frontier town trying to be more than it was false. Front buildings pretending to be 2 stories when they were only 1. Dirt road rutted deep from wagon wheels. Dust devils spinning themselves out in the heat that was already building. But this morning there was a crowd gathered, and that made everything different. The platform stood outside Hendrix's general store. Martha had seen it before they used it for the livestock auctions twice a month. Today, 11 women stood on it in a line, and the smell of fierce sweat mixed with the dust in the air. Martha was last in line. The other women were younger, thinner. They wore lawn bonnets with the brims pulled low, kept their eyes down the way nice girls were supposed to. Martha wore no bonnet. Hadn't seemed much point in pretending today. Men circled below the platform like buyers checking over cattle at auction. They talked low to each other, pointed sometimes. You could hear the murmur of their voices, though not the words. The women on the platform stood very still, like rabbits hoping the hawk won't notice. A man in a dark suit stepped forward, had a list in his hand, and a voice that carried across the square like he was calling hogs. "Gentlemen, if you please, we'll proceed in order." 3 rounds. That's how it worked. Martha knew. First round, 6 women chosen, stepping down with their hands in the hands of men who'd spoken up loud enough to claim them. Bargain struck right there in the dust. And the watching eyes. Second round, 4 more women. You could see the relief wash over them like cool water, shoulders dropping, breath coming easier. Even a poor match was better than standing alone. Martha stood on the platform by herself now. The crowd had thinned out considerable. Most of the men were already walking away with their new brides, heading toward wagons and saddle horses. The few who remained stared at Martha with something between pity and embarrassment, like they'd accidentally seen something they shouldn't. The man in the dark suit cleared his throat twice. "And the, final candidate?" He wouldn't meet her eyes, looking instead at his paper like the answer might be written there. "Any gentleman interested in silence?" Somebody coughed. A horse stamped and blew. Martha's hands found her skirt fabric without her meaning them to. The worn calico was rough under her palms. She'd washed it so many times the weave was thin as hope. She gripped it tight, felt the threads cutting into her skin. That small pain helped. Gave her something to think about besides all those watching eyes. She stared hard at the building across the street. Mitchell's Saloon. Counted the windows, 4 of them. Glass wavy with age and dirt. Focused on that. Not on the whispers that sounded like hornets buzzing. The man in the dark suit tried again, and his voice had gone soft now, almost kind, which somehow made it worse. "Final opportunity, gentlemen. This young lady comes with excellent references for—" Martha stopped listening, started counting instead. The nails in the platform boards under her boots could see their heads. Iron turned rust red from years of weather and wear. Started at the left edge and worked her way across. 47 of them. She made it. Counted twice to be certain. She would not faint. Would not give them that satisfaction. The coordinator was asking a 3rd time now, and that pitying softness in his voice made Martha's jaw clench so hard her teeth hurt. She hated that softness more than she'd hated all the whispers combined. She locked her knees, kept counting. 47 nails, 4 windows. 11 women had stood here this morning when the sun was barely up. Now just 1 remained. The sun was climbing higher, getting serious about the day's heat. Sweat ran down Martha's back under the calico, and the smell of that coal tar soap rose up from her skin. Her mother had scrubbed her raw last night, as if being clean could somehow make her smaller, prettier, wanted. Martha thought, "I will remember every single face that turned away." And there were many. Lord, there were many. The air had that particular stillness that comes right before something breaks wide open. Heat rising off the dirt, dust settling back down, the whole town holding its breath and waiting. Then Martha heard it. Boot heels on packed earth. Steady rhythm. Somebody walking with purpose, while everyone else was standing still or walking away. She didn't turn her head, didn't dare hope it meant anything, But those footsteps kept coming, steady as a heartbeat. Folks have a way of surprising us sometimes, don't they? If this story found you today, maybe there's a reason. We'd sure like to know where you're reading from. It's a comfort, knowing we're not the only ones remembering when life was simpler, even if it wasn't always easy. The whiskey glass sat on the windowsill where Daniel Brooks had set it near 20 minutes ago. Still full to the brim, condensation beating on the outside, running down to pool on the dusty wood. His hand moved toward it, stopped halfway. He needed his head clear for this kind of gamble. Through the saloon window, he could see that platform plain as day. The woman standing alone up there, last one left. The coordinator's voice had gone all soft and pitying, asking for the third time. Nobody stepping forward. Nobody even pretending to consider it. Daniel's hand went to his vest pocket, pulled out the handbill he'd folded there yesterday morning, smoothed it flat against his thigh, though he'd already memorized every word written on it. Martha Green, 30 experience in household accounts and farm management. Wasn't her body he'd been studying? Was those words household accounts, farm management? His ranch was bleeding money like a stuck pig. Had maybe 3 months before the bank came calling with papers he couldn't answer. He'd spent half the night doing arithmetic in his head, over and over, always coming to the same answer no matter which way he figured it. He needed help, the kind that cost more than he could pay in wages, even if he had wages to pay. Daniel folded the handbill, put it back in his pocket, stepped out from the saloon doorway into the noon sun. The light hit him hard after the dimness inside had to squint against it, kept walking anyway. His boots on the packed dirt made a rhythm he could feel in his chest, each step heavier than the last, like wading into deep water. The crowd started turning, faces swiveling to watch him. He could hear the shift in their muttering, voices dropping low. That's Brooks. Surely he ain't fixing to. Man must be desperate as hell. Daniel didn't look at any of them. Kept his eyes on the platform. On the woman standing there staring at something across the street like she could wish herself clean away from this place. His shadow reached the platform before he did. Fell across those worn boards. Across her dust-covered boots. She turned her head. Slow, like she was afraid of what she might see. Their eyes met. Daniel saw her take him in, saw her face do something complicated. He couldn't quite read. Not hope, not relief, something colder than that. Like she was doing arithmetic of her own, figuring what this might cost her. He climbed the steps, 3 of them. His boots hit each one hard enough he felt it in his knees, heard it echo in the quiet that had fallen over the square. Thud, thud, thud. The coordinator's mouth was hanging open, trying to form words that wouldn't come. The crowd had gone stone silent, not the comfortable kind, the waiting kind, waiting to see what fool thing Daniel Brooks was about to do in front of the whole town. Daniel stopped right in front of Martha Green. She was taller than he'd expected, eye level with his chin. That brown calico dress hung on her plain. No decoration. No bustle trying to make her something she wasn't. Her hands were white-knuckled on the fabric, gripping so hard he could see the threads straining. He opened his mouth. 4 words. That's all it would take to change both their lives. His throat felt like he'd been eating dust for a week. That whiskey would have helped smooth the way. Too late for that now. I'll take her. The words came out flat, businesslike. Which is exactly what this was, business, pure and simple. Martha Green's eyes went wide, just for a heartbeat. Then her face smoothed out again, blank as new paper. Behind him the crowd erupted. Voices rising up, disbelief and shock, and something meaner running underneath it all. Daniel heard his name getting passed around like bad news, but he was watching her face. Watching her decide something behind those eyes. Her lips parted. First words he'd hear her speak. The wagon ride took 20 minutes by Martha's counting. Not one word passed between them. Just the creak of axles needing grease. The jangle of the horse's bit. The leather straps rubbing steady. Martha kept her hands folded in her lap. Watched the land change from town dust to open range stretching out forever. The certificate in her carpet bag said she was married now. Ink still wet when they'd left the land office, smelling like rust and metal. Justice Harmon's pen had scratched across that paper while Martha stood there thinking how strange it was that a whole life could change and with just some ink and a signature. Daniel's voice when he'd said it, strictly business. Understand? She'd answered, I do. Two meanings in those words. Neither one had anything to do with love. The sun was dropping behind the western hills when the ranch came into view, turning the sky the color of a healing bruise. Adobe house. Walls the color of dried blood. The whole thing listing slightly east, Martha could see it plain from 100 yards out. The way a body sees a ship, going down slow. The corrals had split rails with gaps showing through. Barn roof patched with tin that didn't match the rest. Catching that last light like a scar that won't heal right. Daniel pulled the wagon up in front of the house. Didn't look at her when he said, This is it? Martha climbed down. Her boots hit packed earth, dust puffing up around the hem of her dress. She turned slow, taking it all in with the eye she'd learned from watching her father assess stock and land the eye that saw what needed fixing and what was already past saving. Worse than he'd let on. Considerably worse. Two men came out from the barn. The older one pulled his hat off soon as he spotted her. Mexican fellow, maybe 60, with eyes that crinkled kind when he nodded her way. Señora, Tomás, Daniel said. This here's my wife, Martha. The word sounded strange coming out of his mouth. New, unused. The younger man looked maybe 18, lean as a whip and twice as quick to snap. He looked Martha up and down. Didn't quite manage to hide that little smirk. Ma'am? Billy, Daniel said. Just the name. But there was warning in it. They all stood there in the fading light, nobody quite knowing what came next. I'll show you inside. Daniel finally managed. The house was cooler, those thick adobe walls holding back the day's heat the way they were meant to. Rough pine table. Horsehair sofa with one spring poking through the worn fabric like a bone through skin. Nickel-plated stove that had seen better days, braided rag rug made from old flour sacks. Martha recognized the pattern, had made enough of them herself to know good work when she saw it. Your room's there? Daniel pointed to a door on the left. Mine's there? Pointed right. Like I promised. Martha nodded. The relief between them was something you could have weighed and measured. You said you kept books, Martha started. Daniel's laugh came out wrong, short and bitter as bad coffee. That's awful generous of you to call them books. He walked to the corner, picked up a whiskey crate that had seen better days, carried it to the table, set it down hard enough the whole thing rattled like old bones. Books? Martha looked inside. Papers. Receipts. I owe us, scrawled on butcher paper in 3 different hands. Some of them barely fit to read. Bills with tallow stains soaked clear through. An old Arbuckle's coffee tin stuffed with more paper. Let me see them, she said. Daniel shrugged. Suit yourself. He walked out without saying where he was headed. Didn't need to say it. Martha stood there alone in the quiet house. The last light coming through the window was almost gone now. She pulled one of those papers out, held it up to see better. Cattle sale from last spring. A name signed at the bottom in confident script, Garrett Wade, livestock agent. She pulled out another. Same name. Another. Same again. The coal oil lamp sat on the table. Martha found matches in a tin by the stove, struck one against the rough wood. That sulfur smell made her eyes water something fierce. She touched flame to wick, adjusted the glass chimney, until the light steadied and held. Then she upended that crate. Everything scattered across the pine surface in a mess that would have shamed a pig farmer. Her hands started moving without her thinking about it. Sort by date, stack by creditor, separate by type sales here, purchases there, debts in another pile, regular expenses off to the side. The chaos had a pattern underneath if you knew how to look for it. She just had to find it, piece by patient piece. An hour went by. Maybe too hard to tell when you're working by lamplight and the world outside has gone full dark. Her fingers were black with old ink, smudged with tallow and dirt. But those stacks were growing steady. Order coming out of disaster, one paper at a time. She didn't hear Daniel come back. Didn't know he was standing in the doorway watching her work in that lamplight. Her shadow thrown large against the adobe wall. Hands moving with the kind of purpose that comes from knowing exactly what needs doing. On the table in front of her, one stack had grown taller than all the rest. Every single paper in it had the same name written across the bottom. Garrett Wade. Martha picked up the steel-tip pencil somebody had left lying there. Started adding numbers in the margin of one receipt, then another. The arithmetic was simple once you saw what you were looking at. The pattern wasn't just sitting there quiet. It was screaming at her plain as day. This man had been stealing from Daniel for 2 years running. Maybe longer. Martha set down that pencil, stared at the proof, written out in her own careful hand. Tomorrow she'd have to tell him. He wouldn't want to hear it. Men never did want to hear they'd been played for fools, especially by someone they'd trusted. But numbers didn't lie. Never had. Never would. She reached for the next paper in the pile. Her hand stopped mid-reach. Footsteps, right behind her in the doorway. The coffee was already boiling hard when Martha came into the kitchen next morning. Daniel stood at the stove with his back to her, still wearing yesterday's shirt. She'd heard him moving around before the sun was properly up, boots on the floor, door creaking, the strike of a match. She set the ledger on the table, let it land with enough sound to make him turn around. "Morning," he said. Martha pulled out a chair. The legs scraped across the floor. She sat down, opened that ledger to the page she'd marked with a slip of butcher paper. "Garrett Wade's been shorting your weights," she said flat out. 30% near as I can calculate." Daniel's hand stopped halfway to the coffee pot, just hung there in the air. "What did you say? Your cattle sales. Every single one that went through Wade these past 2 years? The numbers don't match up with what the market should have paid you." He poured coffee into 2 tin cups, brought them to the table slow, set one in front of her. Steam rising up between them, smelling like home and comfort, and things that couldn't last. "You saying I can't do simple arithmetic?" Martha met his eyes straight on. "I'm saying he's a thief." Daniel sat down heavy, picked up his fork, set it back down without using it. His jaw was working like he was chewing something tough and finding gristle. "You calling me a fool, then?" "I'm calling him a thief," Martha said again, keeping her voice level as a floor. There's a considerable difference between the two. She slid the ledger across the table toward him. Her finger tapped the column she'd marked in pencil. Look here. This is what you wrote down he paid. Here's what you should have gotten based on market rates that week. I checked the newspaper archives at Hendrix's store yesterday while you were out checking fence. Daniel stared at those numbers. His finger traced down the column, stopping at each entry. His breathing changed, got shorter, harder, like a man climbing steep grade. $2,300, Martha said quiet. That's what I figure it comes to. Over 2 years of selling through him. The silence stretched out long enough to hurt. Outside, a rooster was crowing his fool head off. The coffee was going cold in their cups, neither one of them drinking it. Prove it, Daniel said finally. His voice had gone rough. Martha stood up, walked to the corner where she'd left something wrapped careful in an old blanket last night, unwrapped it slow. The brass beam of the assayer's scale caught the morning light coming through the window, gleaming like new money. Borrowed this from Tom Mitchell at the assay office yesterday evening, she said. Told him we needed to verify some weights for our own records. She set it on the table between them. Market days today. Wade'll be there with his rigged scale, same as always. Daniel looked at the scale, looked at her, something shifting behind his eyes. You planned this whole thing out. I did. He pushed back from the table, stood up, walked over to the window, hands braced hard on the sill like he needed something solid to hold on to. Wade ain't gonna take kindly to being called out public. I reckon he won't. Let him make his fuss. Daniel turned around, studied her face for a long moment, like he was seeing somebody different standing there than who he'd brought home yesterday. Then he reached for his hat hanging on the peg by the door. Hitch up the wagon, he said. The market square was already thick with folks when they pulled in. Cattle in the pens, lowing and stamping, dust rising up to mix with the morning heat that was building serious, men shouting prices back and forth. The whole place smelled like manure and money and desperation. Martha climbed down from the wagon with that scale wrapped in its blanket, heavy enough she had to use both hands, her arms straining with the weight of it. Tomas and Billy were already there with the Brooks cattle 6 head, best of what was left after selling off the weakest last month. Garrett Wade stood by the loading chute in his fancy leather vest, writing in his tally book like he owned the whole operation. That silver watch chain across his middle caught the sun and threw it back like he wanted folks to notice his prosperity. He saw Daniel coming, put on a smile that didn't reach past his teeth. Brooks, got some animals for me today. We do, Daniel said. His voice had gone flat and careful. But we're weighing different this time. Wade's smile held, but something tightened around his eyes. That's so. Martha stepped forward, set the scale down on the loading platform with a solid thunk, unwrapped it slow, letting every man watching see what it was. The brass beam gleamed in the sunlight. Certified scale, she said, clear enough for the gathering crowd to hear. From the Territorial Assay Office. Got the stamp right there on the beam. Wade's smile was slipping now. Now, ma'am. That's highly irregular. We got ourselves a process that's been working just fine. Process been working real fine for you, Martha cut in. Not so fine for the rest of us. A few other ranchers had stopped what they were doing to watch. Martha could feel their eyes, hear the murmur starting up like bees getting interested in something sweet. The first steer came through the chute. Wade's hand moved to his tally book. Automatic. 1,100 pounds even? Weigh it again, Martha said. On this scale here? Wade's face was starting to go red under his tan. Now see here, this is highly unusual. I've been using the same system for years. Weigh it again? Just 2 words. But Martha put iron in them. The steer stood there in the pen, huffing and rolling its eyes. Billy and Tomas looked at Daniel. He nodded once. They ran that animal onto Martha's certified scale. The needle swung wide, then settled down to rest. 1,430 pounds, Martha read out loud. The murmur got considerably louder. Men pressing in closer now, wanting to see for themselves. Wade sputtered like a wet fire trying to catch. Now that just ain't possible. That scale's got to be off somehow. I've been using the same weights for stealing, Martha said, and her voice carried across that whole square. From every rancher here who trusted you to deal fair. Wade's mouth opened and closed like a fish pulled out of water. You can't. I'll have you know I'm a respected businessman. The scale's certified, Daniel said, and his hand came down on Martha's shoulder. First time he'd touched her deliberate since the wedding. Got the territory stamp right there, plain as day. You calling the territorial assayer a liar? Wade? Wade looked around at all those faces watching him. You could see him doing calculations behind his eyes, figuring how this was going to play out. Then all that bluster just collapsed in on itself like a rotten barn. There may have been some discrepancies in the measurements, he said, voice gone small. 330 pounds on just one animal. Martha said, 30% short, just like the ledgers showed for every sale these past 2 years. They weighed the rest of the cattle one by one. Every single animal came up heavy compared to Wade's numbers. By the time they finished, there was a fair crowd gathered, and other ranchers were demanding their own stock get rechecked. Wade left without his commission. Walked fast toward his horse with his shoulders hunched up like a man trying to make himself small. Didn't look back once. Billy stood there beside the empty pen, watching Martha coil up that scales chain. When she looked up, that smirk was clean gone from his face. "Ma'am," he said, and his voice had changed to something like respect. That was really something to see. Evening came on soft. The house was quiet except for the sound of coins hitting the pine table. Martha counting careful. Daniel watching from his chair. $412, she said when she'd finished the last stack. What he owed you from today, plus what he paid back from previous sales once I showed him the ledger numbers. Daniel reached across the table. His hand covered hers where it rested on those coins, warm and calloused and steady. You just paid for yourself, and then some. Martha looked at his hand covering hers, looked up at his face. I earned more than that, I reckon. His fingers tightened just slightly, then let go. You surely did. Outside, hoofbeats, coming fast up the road through the dark. Not the slow clip-clop of somebody heading home after a long day. This was urgent. This was trouble. Both of them turned toward the door at the same time. The hoofbeats stopped hard, then a fist pounding on wood. Brooks, you open up right now. Daniel's hand went to his hip, where his gun belt was hanging on the chair. Martha's breath caught in her chest. That wasn't Garrett Wade's voice out there. Daniel pulled the door open hard. A boy stood there in the lamplight, maybe 14 years old, breathing like he'd been running. His horse behind him was lathered white, sides heaving. Mr. Brooks, sir. The boy got out between gasps. Tom Mitchell down at the saloon sent me. Says to tell you Garrett Wade left town on the evening stage, owing debts all over, ain't coming back. Tom says. Daniel fished a coin from his pocket, handed it over. The boy touched his hat and was gone, hoofbeats fading back toward town. When Daniel turned around, Martha was still sitting at the table, her hands flat on the wood, beside all that money they'd counted out. "Well," Daniel said. Martha nodded slow. Neither one of them needed to say the rest that Wade running meant he couldn't make trouble for them. Meant they'd won clean. Daniel threw the bolt on the door, walked back to the table, and sat down heavy in his chair. They stayed there until the lamp oil burned low, neither one talking much. Just the sound of their breathing, and those coins gleaming dull in the fading light. 6 weeks has a way of changing things without folks meaning it to. Mornings. Martha would wake to the smell of coffee already brewing strong. She'd come out to the kitchen, and Daniel would be sitting at the table with the ledger open in front of him, waiting. They'd go over the numbers together, his questions getting sharper, her answers coming easier, like two people learning to speak the same language. Then they'd split up for the day's work, Daniel out to the corrals and the fence line, Martha at the desk with the contracts she was building piece by piece, writing letters to direct buyers in careful script, cutting out the middlemen who'd been bleeding them dry. The weekly mail rider started knowing her handwriting. Supper was beans and cornbread most nights, salt pork when they had it, which wasn't often. They'd sit across from each other at that pine table. And somewhere around the second week, Daniel started asking her what she thought about things. Feed costs for winter, which cattle to sell off before the cold came, whether they could afford to bring on another hand come spring. And he'd listen when she answered. Really listen, not just wait for his turn to talk like most men did. By the 6th week, the silence between them had changed. Less empty. More like two people comfortable enough not to fill every minute with words. That's when the storm rolled in. Martha was in the barn, checking on the new calf when the sky just opened up. No warning to speak of, just wind slamming those barn doors and rain coming down like the heavens had cracked wide. Daniel came running in from the far pasture, soaked clear through, hat dripping. His shirt stuck to him dark with water. "That came on powerful quick," he said. Breathing hard, Martha nodded, looked out at the rain. You couldn't see 10 feet through it, just solid gray wall of water hammering the earth. They sat down on hay bales, 3 feet of space between them. The barn roof drummed so loud they had to raise their voices to be heard over it. The barn smelled like hay and horse sweat and old leather, mixed with the green smell of rain on dust. Lightning flashed through the cracks in the walls, turning everything white for a heartbeat, then dark again. "Could be here a while," Daniel said. "Could be." They sat quiet for a spell, listening to that rain pound down. Wind rattling the tin patches on the roof, the horses in their stalls shifting and blowing soft through their noses. "Martha," Daniel said finally, "I need to tell you something." She waited, hands gripping her knees. "I chose you off that platform because I figured you'd be grateful." He was staring straight ahead, not looking at her. "Figured you wouldn't make demands? Wouldn't expect things I couldn't give?" He stopped, swallowed hard. "That's the plain truth of it." Martha's laugh came out short and sharp as a slap. "Well, I am grateful," she said. "For the chance you gave me." She turned to look at him direct. "Not for you personally. For the work. For having something I can do that matters more than what I look like." His head snapped around. "That's powerful cold," he said. "That's honest." Martha answered back. "You made a business deal. So did I. No point pretending it was something prettier than what it was." Daniel's jaw worked. You could see him chewing on that, trying to figure how he felt about it. "Is it still just business?" he asked quiet. "For you, I mean..." Martha's throat went tight. She looked down at her hands, ink-stained now, calloused from work that wasn't just housekeeping anymore. "I don't rightly know," she said, just as quiet. "Is it for you?" The rain drummed on. Neither of them moved closer. Neither moved away. "No," Daniel said after a long minute. "Hasn't been for a while now, if I'm being truthful." Before Martha could figure out what to say to that, a bellow came from the far stall, deep and pained and wrong. They were both on their feet and running before the sound finished echoing. The cow was down on her side, heaving. Calf coming, but Martha could see right off it was wrong. Just one hoof showing where there should be two. "Breech," Daniel said. He was already rolling up his sleeves, kneeling in the straw, reached in careful. His face went tight, then frustrated. "Can't get the right angle. Hands are too big." Martha pushed past him, knelt down in that straw that smelled like manure and fear. "Let me..." She reached in without letting herself think about it. Warm and slick. Her whole arm disappearing past the elbow. Fingers searching blind for that other hoof that was folded back wrong. Found it. Started working it around. Slow and careful. The cow bellowed again, sides heaving. Martha gritted her teeth and kept working. The hoof came forward. Both of them lined up proper now. She got a grip and pulled steady. The calf came out in a rush of fluid and blood, hit the straw, and just laid there not moving. Daniel grabbed a handful of straw, rubbed hard on the calf's ribs, along its sides. "Come on now, come on." The calf's chest jerked. Then a breath. Then another. Stronger. Martha sat back on her heels. Her arms were red to the elbows, shaking so hard she had to brace them on her knees. Daniel was staring at her, not at the calf, at her. "You just saved them both," he said. Martha stood up on legs that felt like water, walked out into the rain that was slowing now, just to the pump in the yard, let that cold well water run over her arms, washing away the blood and the birth smell and the trembling. Daniel came out behind her, stood there in the drizzle. "Thank you," he said, just 2 words. But the way he said them carried weight that had nothing to do with calves or cattle or business arrangements. Martha turned off the pump, stood there dripping, looking at him, looking at her. The rain had stopped, storm moving east, but the air between them still felt heavy, like something waiting to break loose. The rider came just past noon on a Tuesday. 3 men on horseback, one wearing a town suit that had seen better days, one carrying a surveyor's transit on a wooden tripod, one with a leather satchel that had county clerk stamped across it in faded gold letters you could barely make out. Daniel was mending fence in the near corral when they rode up. Martha heard him from inside the house, came out wiping flour off her hands from the biscuits she'd been making. The man in the suit didn't bother climbing down, just sat his horse looking down at Daniel like he was taking measurements for a coffin. "Silas Crenshaw," he said by way of introduction. "I own the land north of here." Daniel set down his hammer. "I know who you are." "Then you know why I'm here." Crenshaw pulled papers from inside his coat, unfolded them one-handed. "Water rights to that creek running through your property belongs to me according to territorial law, riparian doctrine, they call it." Martha moved closer, close enough to hear proper. She could see Daniel's hands tightening on that corral rail, knuckles going white. "That creek's been Brooks water for 10 years running," Daniel said, keeping his voice level. "Your father's claim was filed improper." Crenshaw gestured to the surveyor, who was already climbing down with his equipment. Show him. The surveyor unrolled a map across his saddle horn, started pointing and talking, his voice going on about boundary markers and original surveys and legal descriptions that didn't match up. The words poured out smooth and confident, like he'd said them 100 times before. Martha watched Daniel's face going gray. Without that creek water, the cattle would have nothing to drink come summer. Without cattle, there wasn't any ranch. Without the ranch, there wasn't anything at all. I'll be needing your cooperation in adjusting the property lines proper, Crenshaw was saying. His voice had gone oily, like he was doing them some kind of favor. Otherwise, I file a formal claim with the territory. Court order and all. Could get powerful expensive for you. Brooks. He smiled when he said expensive, like he knew exactly how little money Daniel had to fight with. How long have I got? Daniel's voice came out rough as burlap. Hearing set for a week from Monday. Territorial courthouse over in the county seat. Crenshaw gathered up his reins. Best get yourself a lawyer if you can afford one, which I reckon you can't. The three men rode off, dust rising behind them in the afternoon heat. Daniel stood there staring at nothing in particular. His knuckles were still white on that corral rail. Like if he let go, he might just blow away. Martha walked up beside him. Let me see those papers. He handed them over without looking at her. She read through careful, taking her time with all that legal language that was meant to confuse more than clarify. But underneath all the whereas and heretofore, it was simple enough. Crenshaw was claiming the water, had a surveyor saying his claim was valid, had the county clerk ready to file it all official and binding. This is wrong, Martha said flat out. You a lawyer now. I'm somebody who can read plain English. She tapped the paper hard. This references a survey from 1879, but your father filed his claim back in 1876. I've heard you say so. Daniel turned to look at her proper. So the original boundaries are what matter. This survey they're using, it's from 3 years after your father already had legal title to the land. She folded up those papers. I need to see the original claim, the first one that got filed. That'd be at the county seat, in the land office. Then that's where I'm going. Martha, that's 2 days' ride. You can't what? She met his eyes straight on. Be a woman traveling alone. I've been worse things than that. The stagecoach left before dawn the next morning. Cost $2.50 for the fare. Martha rode it with her carpet bag and $50 from the house. Money wrapped in a handkerchief and pinned inside her dress. The other passengers were a whiskey drummer who snored and 2 women heading to visit family. Nobody talked much, which suited Martha fine. The county seat was bigger than Silver Creek by a fair measure. Had brick buildings that went up 2 stories for real. Not just false fronts. Gas lights on the street corners. The Territorial Land Office sat on Main Street 3 stories of cut stone with the territorial seal carved above the door. Inside, they smelled like old paper and dust and failure, the particular smell of places where dreams get written down and filed away. The clerk was maybe 70 years old if he was a day, spectacles thick as bottle glass. When Martha explained what she needed, he looked at her like she'd asked him to move the Rocky Mountains by hand. Records from 1876, Lord have mercy. That'd be down in the basement archive. Haven't been sorted proper in I don't know how many years. I'll sort through them myself if you'll show me where to look. He did, leading her down narrow stairs that creaked under their feet, into a room with no windows at all, just shelves running floor to ceiling, packed with deed books that had red leather spines and brass clasps, plat maps rolled up and tied with string that had gone brittle with age, filing boxes stuffed so full the papers were spilling out the sides. Good luck to you, the clerk said, and left her there with one oil lamp. Martha set that lamp on a rickety table, rolled up her sleeves, started pulling down books. The Territorial Land Office had organized things by year first, then by county, then by the claimant's name. She found 1876 easy enough, found their county, started searching through for Brooks. 3 hours in, her eyes were burning something fierce from the dim light and all that dust. Her throat felt coated with it. She'd been through near 24 deed books and found nothing that helped. Then she pulled down a box marked Miscellaneous Claims, 1875 to 1877. Inside were loose papers, survey maps, hand-drawn plats that looked like they'd been done by folks with more hope than skill. She sorted through, her hands moving faster now, breath coming quicker. There. A plat map. Faded ink on linen paper that had gone yellow at the edges, but clear enough to read if you held it up to the light just right. Brooks. Daniel Sr. Original homestead claim. Filed March 1876. Boundary markers listed out in careful script. Creek running right through the property, clear as day. Water rights written out explicit. Martha held it up to that lamp, tracing the property lines with her finger that was shaking just slightly now. The boundaries were different from what Crenshaw's survey showed. Different markers entirely. Different creek access. This claim came first, was filed legal and proper with the territory. Crenshaw's surveyor had moved the markers to suit what Crenshaw wanted. Martha's hands shook harder as she rolled that map up careful. This was proof. This would win the whole thing. She climbed those stairs, found the clerk, paid him 15 cents to make an official copy with the territorial seal stamped on it proper. Then she caught the afternoon stage heading back home. Daniel was on the porch waiting when the stage pulled up that evening. He stood soon as he spotted her climbing down. "Well, he said before she'd even made it to the steps. Martha pulled that map from her bag, unrolled it slow. Original claim, filed March of 1876. Your father's boundaries include the creek, clear and legal. Water's yours." Daniel stared at it like he couldn't quite believe what he was seeing, then looked up at her. "You found it." "I did." He laughed, but it came out strange half relief, half something that sounded almost like crying. "Lord help us, you actually found it." That night they sat at the kitchen table going over what he'd need to say at the hearing, how to present the evidence proper, what questions they might ask. Martha's voice stayed steady, walking him through it step by step. Her hand came down on his shoulder without her thinking about it. First time she'd touched him deliberate since that day they got married. "We'll win this," she said quiet. Daniel's hand came up, covered hers, held it there warm and solid. "We will." Outside, a horse whinnied nervous in the dark. Then hoofbeats coming fast up the road. Daniel's hand dropped from hers. He stood quick, moving toward the door. The hoofbeats stopped sudden. Silence stretched out. Then a voice. Crenshaw's voice. Loud enough to carry. "Brooks, you got something belongs to me, and I aim to have it back." The territorial courthouse had brick walls 2 feet thick, and windows made of wavy glass that turned the world outside into something that looked underwater. Judge Carlisle sat behind a raised desk with law books stacked on either side like fortifications and against chaos. Martha and Daniel took the bench on the left side. Crenshaw sat across the aisle with his surveyor and a lawyer wearing a black coat that had seen considerable wear. The room smelled like old wood and lamp oil, and the particular staleness of places where arguments get settled by men in robes. The clerk called the case. Martha's hands were folded tight in her lap, gripping each other so hard her knuckles had gone bone white. She made herself loosen them deliberate, laid them flat on her thighs where the fabric of her navy dress was already damp with sweat. Crenshaw's lawyer went first. Talked for near 20 minutes about riparian doctrine and territorial water law and prior appropriation. His voice was smooth as butter on warm bread. Confident, like this whole thing was already decided, and they were just going through the motions to make it look proper. Then he called up the surveyor. The man stepped forward with his maps, started explaining his measurements and his markers and his calculations in that droning voice that made it all sound official and unchangeable. Judge Carlyle listened, made notes on the paper in front of him, looked bored as a man waiting for paint to dry. "Mr. Brooks," the judge said finally, not looking up. "Your response." Daniel stood. Martha had drilled him last night on what to say. Keep it simple and plain. State the facts clear. Let the evidence do the talking. "My father filed his claim back in 1876. Your Honor, 3 years before this survey they're using was even done." He pulled out the plat map Martha had found. His hands were steady holding it. "Original boundaries, filed legal with the territorial office. Creek water's been Brooks water since then, according to the law." He handed that map up to the judge. Carlyle unrolled it slow, studied it close. His eyebrows went up just slightly. "This is certified official." "Yes, sir." "Territorial seals right there, where you can see it plain." The judge looked over at Crenshaw's surveyor. "Your survey's dated 1879, that correct?" The surveyor cleared his throat twice. "Yes, Your Honor, but the markers I used were placed after this claim was already filed and approved by the territory." Carlyle set down the map careful. "Brooks's claim stands. Water rights belong to him legal and binding. This matter's closed." The gavel came down hard. Martha let out the breath she'd been holding so long her chest hurt. Her vision had gone spotty around the edges. Daniel turned in his seat. Their eyes met and held. Something passed between them that didn't need words relief. Yes, but deeper than that. Victory they'd won together. Crenshaw stood up fast, his chair scraping loud. His face had gone red as fresh meat. "This ain't finished. Brooks, not by a damn sight." He walked out, his boots hitting that wooden floor like gunshots in a canyon. Daniel's hand found Martha's, squeezed it. "We did it. We did." But Crenshaw's words hung in the air between them like smoke that wouldn't clear. 2 days later, Daniel rode out early to check the fence line near the creek. The disputed section wanted to make sure Crenshaw hadn't tried anything foolish out of spite. Martha watched him go from the kitchen window. Something tight settled in her chest that she couldn't name and didn't want to examine too close. He took the sorrel gelding with the white blaze down its face. Good-tempered animal, steady as they came. She went back to the week's accounts, trying to concentrate on the numbers that usually came easy. Mid-afternoon, hoofbeats came pounding into the yard, fast and frantic and wrong. Martha dropped her pencil, ran to the door. Tomas on his gray mare, face gone white as milk. Senor Daniel the horse. She throw him hard." Martha was already running, down to the corral where Billy was saddling another horse with hands that shook. She swung up behind him without asking permission. They rode hard toward the creek, the horse's hooves throwing up dirt. Found Daniel on the ground near a limestone outcrop that jutted up like broken teeth. The sorrel standing 20 feet off, reins trailing in the dust. The horse was shaking all over, eyes rolling white. Martha slid down before the horse even stopped proper, dropped to her knees beside Daniel in the dirt. His eyes were open, conscious. Thank the Lord. but his face had gone the color of old ashes, and his breathing came in short, careful gasps like each one cost him dear. Horse spooked. He managed to get out. Rattler in the rocks? Threw me hard, landed wrong. His left arm hung at an angle that made Martha's stomach turn over. And the way he was breathing, shallow and careful, like that ribs for certain. "Don't you move," Martha said. Her voice came out steadier than she felt. She looked up at Billy. "Ride for Doc Patterson fast as that horse will carry you." Billy took off at a dead run. Thomas brought the wagon around gentle as he could manage. Between the two of them, they got Daniel onto the wagon bed, every small movement making his jaw clench tight and sweat break out fresh on his forehead. The ride back to the ranch took forever, and no time at all. Doc Patterson came within the hour, black bag in hand, set up in Daniel's bedroom, sent Martha for clean linens and hot water and the carbolic solution that smelled sharp enough to burn your nose. She brought everything he asked for. Stood there watching while the doctor worked, her hands twisting in her apron. "Collarbones broke clean through," Patterson said, his fingers gentle along Daniel's shoulder. He moved down to the ribs, pressing careful. "These are cracked, 3 of them at least. Can't do much but wrap them tight and hope they heal straight." He pulled out a brown glass bottle with a cork stopper. "Laudanum. This'll help with the worst of the pain." Daniel took the dose, his face relaxing just a hair as the medicine started working its way through him. Patterson made a sling from torn linen strips, wrapped Daniel's ribs with long bandages that went round and round. "Keep him still. No work, no writing. 4 weeks at the least, you hear?" Then he packed up his bag and left. Martha sat in the chair beside the bed. Watched Daniel's breathing even out as that laudanum pulled him down towards sleep. His eyes closing slow. Night came on. She lit the candle on the bedside table, the flame throwing shadows that moved across the adobe walls. Brought a basin of cool water and clean cloths from the kitchen. His fever started just past midnight. Not high, but enough to make him restless. Enough to make him say things she couldn't quite make out. She dipped the cloth in that cool water, wrung it out, laid it across his forehead gentle. His hand moved, searching, found hers, gripped it with surprising strength. "Martha," he said, eyes still closed. "Don't. I'm right here." His fingers tightened. "Don't leave. I'm not going anywhere. I promise you." She meant it with everything in her. And that's when the knowing hit her square cold and complete and terrifying. When had this happened? When had he stopped being just the man who'd made a business arrangement and become the person she couldn't bear to lose? Her hand started shaking. She pulled it free, careful, stood up, walked to the window. Outside, the moon was climbing, turning everything silver and black. The ranch yard, the corrals, the barn, everything they'd built together these past months. Behind her, Daniel's breathing changed, got rougher. She turned back quick. He was mumbling again, caught in fever dreams. She crossed to him, picked up the cloth. Fresh water, cold from the well, laid it on his forehead, smoothed back his hair. His eyes opened partway, not quite focused. "Martha. Shh now, rest. Need to tell you." His voice was thick, slurred from the laudanum and the fever both. "Tell me when you're better. Right now you just rest." His eyes closed again. Martha sat back down in that chair. Her hand reached out, hovering over his. Not touching yet. Not quite. The candle burned lower. Outside, coyotes started up their night singing. Inside, just Daniel's breathing and the old house settling around them, Martha's hand finally came down, covered his where it lay on the quilt. She whispered it so quiet even she could barely hear. "Don't you leave me. Please." Then the tears came. First she'd cried since that platform, since the day she'd stood there counting nails and refusing to break for all those watching eyes. She was breaking now. Dawn light came through the window, thin and gray. Martha still in that chair, her back aching, something fierce. She'd fallen asleep sitting up, her hand still holding Daniel's. A sound woke her. Not from inside the room, from outside. Horse hooves on the hard-packed dirt. Multiple horses moving together. She stood stiff, every joint protesting. Looked out the window. 3 riders coming up the road in the early light. Even from here she could make out the lead horse. Crenshaw. Martha met Crenshaw at the door before he could knock. He didn't climb down from his horse, just sat there looking at her like she was something stuck to his boot. The 2 men with him stayed back, one she recognized from the courthouse. The other a stranger wearing a gun belt that looked too new. "Need to speak with Brooks," Crenshaw said. "He's laid up recovering. From what I hear, he took himself a bad fall." Crenshaw's smile didn't have any warmth in it. "Real shame about that. Powerful, unfortunate timing." Martha's hands tightened on the doorframe. "What do you want?" "Filed me a new claim. Different legal channel, this time. Riparian rights through the Territorial Water Commission instead of the Land Office. They're reviewing it as we speak." He pulled papers from inside his coat. "Need the property owner's signature here. Agreeing to arbitration while they sort it out proper." The judge already ruled on this. Judge ruled on one claim through one office. This here's a different matter entirely, going through different authorities. He held out those papers. "Where's your husband at? Mrs. Brooks. I told you already. He's recovering from his injuries." "Then I reckon I'll wait till he can come out here and conduct business like a man ought to." "No," Martha said flat. "You won't." Crenshaw's smile dropped clean off his face. "Now you listen here. You listen." Martha cut him off. Her voice came out hard as iron. "You lost. Court said so clear. Now you're trying to do through paperwork in government offices what you couldn't do legal? Well, I'm telling you no. I need to speak with the property owner, not the hired help." "You're looking right at her." Crenshaw laughed, short and mean as a kick. "You're his wife. That ain't the same thing by a damn sight." "Partnership," Martha said. "Equal partnership under territorial law. And I'm telling you, we won't sign anything. Won't agree to anything. And you can take yourself off our land before I have Tomas fetch the sheriff." "I don't negotiate with some—" "Then we're finished talking." Martha stepped back inside, shut the door hard, threw the bolt. Through the window she watched Crenshaw sit there on that horse, his face going redder than fresh-cut beef. Finally he wheeled around sharp, and the 3 of them rode off, dust rising behind her. Daniel's voice came weak from the bedroom doorway. What did he want? She turned. He was standing there leaning heavy on the doorframe, arm still in that sling Doc Patterson had made. His face was pale as milk, but his eyes were clear. "Nothing we're giving him," Martha said, crossing to him. "You ought to be laying down still." "Heard voices out here." Crenshaw. Filing another claim through some different office, trying to get around the judge's ruling. Daniel's jaw went tight. "We'll fight it then." "I'll fight it," Martha said firm. "You'll heal up proper. The notice came 2 days later with the mail rider. Town hall meeting, Friday afternoon at 2 o'clock. Matter of Crenshaw versus Brooks. Water rights arbitration before the town council. Martha read it through twice. Folded it careful. Put it in her apron pocket. That night she went through every contract they had. Every receipt. Every piece of paper that showed what the ranch bought and who it employed, and what it meant to Silver Creek's economy. Made notes in her careful hand. Columns of numbers. Lists of names, not just names, but people. Tom Hendricks, who ran the general store. Frank Morrison, the farrier. Sarah Patterson, who did their laundry and mending. Old Pete, who delivered their mail. The Johansson boys, who helped with spring roundup. Daniel watched from his chair by the stove, still moving careful on account of those ribs. What are you doing? Building us a case. Legal case. Economic one. Better than legal. She showed him what she'd worked out. 6 people employed direct Thomas. Billy, 4 seasonal hands for roundup and branding, 12 businesses they bought from regular. Feed store. Blacksmith. General store for supplies. Lumber yard. The veterinarian when they needed him. Seamstress. Laundry. Boarding house where the seasonal workers stayed. Freight company that hauled their cattle to market. The saddle maker. The farrier. The grain merchant. If Crenshaw takes over, Martha explained, he'll bring in his own people from that big operation he runs up north, use his own suppliers from the next county over. All this money, she tapped the ledger, leaves Silver Creek entirely, goes elsewhere. Daniel stared at those numbers like he was seeing something new. That's mighty clever thinking. That's survival, Martha said. She looked at him straight. He won't negotiate with me on account of I'm a woman. Fine. I'll make the whole town negotiate with him instead. Friday came on clear and hot. Martha put on her navy serge dress, the good one she'd bought with ranch profits. Better fabric than that brown calico. Fit her proper. Had brass buttons that actually matched each other and didn't look like they'd been salvaged from something else. She pinned her cameo brooch at the collar. First real jewelry she'd owned since she was a girl. Picked up the leather document case Daniel had bought for her last month. Still smelled like saddle soap and new beginnings. Daniel tried to come along. She stopped him at the door. You're not healed up enough for this. That man's dangerous. Martha. So am I when I need to be. She climbed up on the wagon beside Tama. Billy rode alongside on his paint mare. Town hall was already packed when they got there. Crenshaw sat at the front table with that same lawyer in the black coat. When he saw Martha walk in alone, his eyebrows went up. Where's your husband? Mrs. Brooks. Home recovering, like I told you. Martha set her document case on the table, opened it deliberate. I'm here to speak for both of us. This is a legal proceeding. I need to deal with the owners. Martha finished for him. That'd be me and Daniel both. Partnership. Like I said. She turned to face the room. The town council sat along one wall, 6 men in chairs. Judge Carlisle at the head of the table. The rest of the space was filled with folks from town. Shopkeepers, suppliers, working people. Martha recognized faces from that platform 4 months back. Some had turned away from her then. Some had whispered. Some had laughed. They were all watching now. But different. Mr. Crenshaw wants our water rights, Martha said, her voice carrying clear. Says the law's on his side. Could be it is. I'm not a lawyer and won't pretend to be. She picked up the first contract from her case. But I know numbers. I know what this ranch means to Silver Creek in plain dollars and cents. She read it out. Tom Hendricks, we buy near $300 of supplies yearly from his store. Frank Morrison, we pay him $60 a year for shoeing horses and mending equipment. Sarah Patterson, $40 for laundry and mending our work clothes. Down the list she went. Every name. Every dollar amount. If Crenshaw takes our water, the ranch can't survive. If the ranch dies, this money disappears with it. She set down those papers. Looked at the council direct. He'll bring his own workers down from up north. Use his own suppliers from over in the next county. Silver Creek loses 6 steady jobs. 12 businesses lose income they count on. One of the councilmen leaned forward, round-faced man who owned the feed store. How much does that total, Mrs. Brooks? Martha had the number ready. $1,800 yearly. Direct spending right here in Silver Creek. Murmuring ran through the crowd. The shopkeepers were doing their own arithmetic now, figuring what they stood to lose. Crenshaw got to his feet. This is highly irregular. The law doesn't give a damn about bit. The law cares about proper claims. Judge Carlisle interrupted sharp. And it cares about community interests when claims are disputed. Mrs. Brooks, you have all this documented proper. Martha handed up the contracts, the receipts, the employment records showing wages paid. Carlisle looked them over careful, passed them to the other council members. Mr. Crenshaw, the judge said after a long minute, your water claim is legally questionable at best. Seeing as how Judge Morrison already ruled against you once, your economic impact on this community is demonstrably negative. You'd be taking money out, not putting it in. He looked at the other councilman. How do you gentlemen vote? 6 hands went up. Every last one. Motion carries. Brooks' water rights stand as originally decided. This matter is finished and closed. Carlisle looked hard at Crenshaw. And if you try filing through yet another office or commission, I'll personally recommend the territorial court sanction you for harassment and abuse of legal process. Crenshaw's face went near purple. He grabbed up his papers, shoved past folks standing in the aisle, stomped out without another word. The room sat quiet for a breath. Then that round-faced councilman stood up. The one who'd been sitting right there when they auctioned her off like livestock. Mrs. Brooks, he said, and his voice had something like respect in it. That was impressive work. Real impressive. Martha nodded once, packed up her papers, walked out into the afternoon sunlight. Billy caught up with her on the street. Ma'am, that was really something special to watch. Tomas just smiled, that quiet, knowing smile of his, handed her up into the wagon. The ride home. Martha's hands were shaking in her lap, not from fear, from something bigger she couldn't quite name yet. She'd stood in front of the whole town that had shamed her, made them listen, made them respect what she'd built. The house came into view over the rise. Daniel was sitting on the porch in one of the chairs, arm still in that sling but standing up when he spotted the wagon coming. She climbed down soon as Tomas stopped. Walked up those steps. Well, Daniel asked, and she could hear his whole heart in that one word. 1. Council voted 6-0 in our favor. His good arm came around her, pulled her in close. Knew you would. Martha let herself lean against him for just a moment. First time she'd let herself be held since ever. Maybe. His lips brushed her hair soft. Thank you for fighting for us. 2 words. But they carried weight that had nothing to do with water rights or ranch business. She pulled back, looked up at his face. Daniel, I need to... Me too, he said quick. Been needing to say something for weeks now, but let me go first. Martha interrupted. He nodded, waited. Her throat felt tight. The words were right there, but getting them out seemed harder than facing down Crenshaw had been. Martha stood there on the porch, trying to find words that had been sitting in her chest for weeks now, heavy as stones. This whole thing, she started, then stopped. Started again. Coming here, marrying you, it was because I had nowhere else to go. You know that. Whole town knows it. Daniel waited, his good hand resting on the porch rail. Stood on that platform, counting nails in the wood, because I couldn't bear to look at their faces anymore. Couldn't watch one more person turn away, like I was something shameful. Her voice stayed steady, but her hands were twisting in her skirt. You didn't turn away. Didn't know why at first. Figured you were desperate or making some fool point or maybe just taking pity on the fat woman nobody wanted. Martha, let me finish. She took a breath that shuddered going in. Took me near 3 weeks to understand you weren't seeing what I looked like. You were seeing what I could do, what I knew, the work I could manage. She looked up at him direct. Started out as pure survival for both of us. 2 people drowning and grabbing hold of whatever we could reach. Then it turned into partnership. You asking my opinion and actually listening when I gave it. Treating what I did like it mattered as much as what you did. Her throat was getting tight now. But somewhere along the way it became something else. For me, anyway, can't say exactly when. Maybe watching you watch me work that first night. Maybe when your hand found mine after we got that money back from Wade. Maybe, her voice cracked just slightly. Maybe sitting beside your bed when you were fevered up and realizing I couldn't stand to lose you. She stopped, swallowed hard. Don't expect you to feel the same. Just needed to say it honest. Needed you to know this isn't business for me anymore. Hasn't been for a good while. It's... Daniel kissed her, cut off whatever she'd been about to say with his mouth on hers. Gentle at first, like he was asking permission. Then deeper when she didn't pull away. When her hands came up to grip his shirt front instead when Narration, when they broke apart they were both breathing like they'd been running. Been trying to say the same thing? Daniel got out, whoa, his forehead pressed against hers. Fell in love with you somewhere between those ledgers and the rainstorm and you standing up to Crenshaw in front of the whole town. Maybe it all happened at once. Maybe it happened piece by piece, so slow I didn't notice till it was already done. Don't matter how it came about. Just matters that it did. Martha's hands were still gripping his shirt. This isn't going to be simple. Nothing worth keeping ever is. People are going to talk. Let them talk till their jaws get tired. He pulled her closer with his good arm. They've been talking since the day I chose you off that platform. Hasn't killed us yet. Has it? She laughed, and it came out half like crying. No, hasn't killed us. They stood there holding each other, while the sun dropped lower behind the western hills, turning the whole sky the color of copper and promise. 3 months went by. Martha woke one morning to coffee already brewing, same as always. Light just starting to show through the bedroom window, their bedroom now, not the separate rooms they'd kept those first 4 months. She dressed in the calico she'd chosen herself from Hendrix's store. Blue this time, not brown. Had cost $2 and felt like victory. Walked out to find Daniel at the table with 2 cups already poured, steam rising up between them in the cool morning air. Morning, he said, and the way he smiled at her still made something warm settle in her chest. She sat down, took the cup he slid across to her. Their fingers touched, and neither one pulled away quick. 7 months since that platform. The ranch was running smooth now, profitable for the first time in 3 years. New contracts in place with direct buyers. Debts paid down to nothing. Money sitting in the bank account at Hendrix's store, earning interest. The house felt different too. Small changes that added up. Curtains Martha had sewn from fabric remnants. Daniel's shirts hanging on pegs, mended with stitches so small you had to look close to see them. Fresh flowers in that blue mason jar on the table, black-eyed Susans Billy had picked and left on the porch without saying who they were from. Outside they could hear Tomas and Billy already at work. Voices calling back and forth, easy, comfortable. Daniel's hand found hers on the table, their fingers laced together, natural as breathing. They sat like that, drinking coffee, watching morning light fill up the room. The mail rider came just before noon, left his usual bundle at the door. Martha sorted through while Daniel washed up at the pump outside. Bills from the feed store, letter from that buyer up in Denver wanting to increase his order, an envelope with handwriting she recognized. She opened it, read it through, then handed it across to Daniel when he came back in. An invitation. Another one of those selection ceremonies. Silver Creek, middle of next month. Daniel read it. Set it down on the table. Want me to burn it? Martha picked it back up, looked at that careful script, remembered standing on that platform in the heat, the whispers, the turning away, the counting of nails to keep from breaking. No, she said slow. Let's keep it. Daniel's eyebrow went up. Keep it. Frame it, maybe. Hang it somewhere we'll see it regular. She met his eyes. Remind ourselves where we started, how far we've come from that. He thought about it, nodded. All right then. That afternoon he rode into town, came back with a simple pine frame, nothing fancy. They put the invitation in it careful, hung it in the hallway where they'd pass it every day. Evening found them on the porch. The work done, supper finished, just sitting while the day wound down toward dark. Martha's head rested on Daniel's shoulder. His arm was around her waist, healed up strong now. They watched the cattle moving slow in the far pasture, the barn swallows making their last passes before settling in for night, the sunset painting those distant mesas, every shade between copper and blood. Billy came up from checking the horses, saw them sitting there. You two gonna spend the whole evening out here like a couple of youngsters sparking? Might. Daniel said easy. Billy shook his head, grinning. Kept walking toward the bunkhouse. Tomas passed by after, heading home to his little place beyond the barn. Didn't say anything. Just smiled that knowing smile of his and touched his hat. Martha felt Daniel's fingers tighten gentle on her waist, felt his breath warm in her hair. You happy? He asked quiet. She thought about it real, not just answering quick to be polite. Yeah, she said finally. I reckon I am. Me too. They stayed there while the stars came out one by one, while the coyotes started their singing out in the hills, while the land went dark except for lamplight spilling yellow from the windows. Behind them, through the open door, that framed invitation hung in the hallway, not hidden away, not forgotten. Just there a reminder of shame that had turned into something else entirely. Reminder that sometimes the worst days lead to the best ones, if you're strong enough not to break, if you're willing to do the work, if you're brave enough to let business turn into partnership, and partnership turn into love. The door stayed open to the night air, to the sound of crickets and distant cattle and the old house settling around them, to the life they'd built from nothing but necessity and numbers and two people refusing to give up. Not a fairy tale, just real, just earned, just theirs. There's something quiet that settles in after a story like this one. Not the kind of quiet that feels empty, more like the kind that comes after you've been carrying something heavy and finally set it down for a spell. Martha and Daniel's story doesn't wrap up with a bow. Real life never does. Does it? Some things stay unresolved, a little tender around the edges. That's just how it goes when you've lived long enough to know that loving someone doesn't fix everything. It just makes the hard parts worth carrying. Many of us have stood where Martha stood in one way or another. Maybe not on a platform in front of a whole town, but we've all felt unseen at some point. Felt like we had to prove our worth when it should have been obvious all along. Some of us found love late, or found it in unexpected places, or built it slow from something that didn't look like love at the start. It's all right if this story doesn't answer everything. It's allowed to just rest here between us, this reminder that people are complicated, that dignity matters, that good things can grow from hard soil if you're patient enough to tend them. Thank you for sitting with me through this whole thing. Thank you for listening all the way to the end.